Welcome, Doomtown fans, to my review of Immovable Object Unstoppable Force. This is the first faction expansion for Doomtown, and we're going to see two new factions introduced with this box. For the sake of clarity, I'm going to split up this box into a little bit different order than it appears in the box itself. This first part, we're going to be looking at the 108 Righteous Bandits and some of the cards associated with them. In part 2, we're going to be looking at the Eagle Wardens and some of the cards associated with them. We're going to start off with the outfit card for the 108 Righteous Bandits. This is an 18 with 3 income. It has Noon Boot, move your dude to the location of one of your other dudes without booting and even if booted. This is kind of a big departure, I would say, for outfit powers. Generally, we've seen either economic effects or ways to earn influence or points with the outfits. This is a way to move your dudes around, and this is certainly really good. It's kind of a Mustang sort of effect, but you have to go somewhere where there is another dude. I don't see that as being a huge requirement. This is going to be such a nice defensive effect for controlling your own deeds. If you have a guy at a deed, they roll up on it, you can just move one of your big fighting guys in play, and it's going to be hard for them to cause a shootout there. This is certainly going to be a good effect. I think we need to look at the other cards that are in this faction before we really talk about this any further, but this is certainly an interesting new power to put on an outfit card, and I think is going to really define some of the aspects of the play with this faction. The first dude that we have for the Bandits is Benjamin Washington. He's an ace of spades, he's 1 draw, 0 influence, he's one to play with no upkeep. He's a grifter. React boot at the start of the game, discard 1 or more cards from your hand. For each card you discard, 1 dude gets -2 upkeep until high noon, draw a card. This is pretty sweet as the grifter effect for this faction. In general, our starting posses always have to be such small guys. There have been some kind of gimmicky decks that start some bigger guys, especially like the Judge Harry Somerset base deck. But for the most part, we have to start a big troop of weaker guys that don't have very much upkeep, because otherwise we stunt our income way too much early on. We can't play deeds, and therefore we can't expand our economy as quickly as we need to. Benjamin here is certainly going to be a way to subvert that. It's going to be possible to start a higher upkeep dude and then just discard 1 or 2 cards. Realistically, 1 card is going to get most dudes' upkeeps down to like 1 or 0, and you do get to draw to replace that card. So really, I think it's just going to be discarding the worst card that you have, drawing a replacement card, and then also saving yourself $2 on the first turn. That seems really strong. Now, his power is obviously going to be contingent on what dudes that we have available to start. Since we can only start dudes that are in faction or neutral dudes in our starting posse, we need to really look at the other dudes that are in this box before we totally lavish on the praise on this guy. The next dude that we have is Wang. He is an ace of spades. He's 2 stud, 1 influence. He's 2 to play with 2 upkeep. He's transient. Not sure what that means. He's Kung Fu 2. We're going to be talking about that in a minute. He has react after he comes into play during high noon. Move one of your other bandits dudes to another location without booting. Before we talk about this dude, I want to go over the Kung Fu keyword a little bit. This is going to be a huge theme for these bandits dudes, and understanding how this works is going to be really important to understanding the power level of these guys. So Kung Fu is a new keyword that is a non-skill, and the way that it works is there are certain action cards that are called techniques, and when you play them, you're going to have to do a Kung Fu test in order to succeed at playing them. Kung Fu tests are a little bit different than other tests in the game, because they're based on the value of the dude who is doing the pull. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull, we're going to add the Kung Fu rating to the value of the dude making the test, and then we're going to try to pull lower than that. So, for example, let's say that we make a pull, and the value that we pull is 2. We're going to add the 2 Kung Fu rating here to his value of ace. That gives us 3. And since we pulled lower than 3, we succeed at the technique. Another really awesome thing about Kung Fu is that the Kung Fu rating is added to the dude's value while he's in play. So in other words, effects that target value like paralysis mark are going to have the Kung Fu rating counted against them. So effectively, this guy's going to be 3 value against value-oriented effects. This guy's got some pretty cool things going for him. He's really, really cheap, and he's a big stud, and he has this react ability that's going to be so awesome. You just play him down, and you get to scoot one of your dudes anywhere other than him. It does have to be a bandit dude, like another one of the 108 Righteous Bandits, but I think that's probably not going to be a whole lot of a requirement if you're playing him in a deck of that faction. Also, he's going to be a low pull. So when you're doing Kung Fu with other dudes, or even just another copy of him, he's going to be an ace. So you're going to pull the lowest possible value. That's going to make it easier to make your techniques. This seems to me like a guy that you're absolutely going to want to play in your deck, and he's probably going to eat up a lot of your ace slots. I think the only reason why you would have trouble playing a bunch of copies of him is that ace is a really hot value, and he's certainly going to bump heads there. The next dude that we have is simply called Randall. He is a 2 of spades, 0 draw, 2 influence, 4 to play with no upkeep. While Randall is at a location with 2 or more other dudes, any players, your maximum hand size is increased by 1. Well, this is an effect that we haven't really seen. Increasing your maximum hand size is cool, not only because it's going to let you hold on to certain cards over a longer period of time without them clogging up your hand as much, but it's also going to let you draw more cards at the end of your turn, right? Because you always get to draw up to your maximum hand size, which if it's more than 5, you'll get to draw an extra card. Now, being at a location with 2 other dudes, that is kind of a requirement, but I think that at home, it's going to be reasonably easy to do. And the fact that this guy is a no upkeep 2 influence dude, I think really makes him eligible as a starting guy. So I really like this dude. I don't think he's the most exciting guy that's in the faction, but he is going to be a nice way to round out potentially your starting posse, and this extra little effect is going to be really cool and nice. The next dude that we have is Shoutin Lee. He is a 2 of spades, 1 draw, no influence. He's 1 to play for no upkeep. He's Kung Fu 1. He does not count towards the number of dudes in your starting posse. Here's another aspect of the design space that hasn't really been explored all that well. Usually you can only start 5 dudes in your starting posse, and with a lot of factions that's really not a huge issue because you run out of money. But if you've noticed here, we've already seen quite a few really cheap dudes that have no upkeep, and then we also have Benjamin to negate some of the upkeep on the first turn. So we're going to potentially be able to start 6 dudes if we play this guy. And he is just going to be this generic little disposable guy. He's only going to use up 1. He's got a draw. He's going to be a nice guy to kind of throw away in a fight if you take some casualties. Next up is Way Foo. He is a 3 of spades, 1 stud, 1 influence. He's 5 to play with 1 upkeep. He's Kung Fu 4. While he's at home, your posse has an extra +1 stud bonus, and that's even if he's not in the posse. Well, here's our Kung Fu master. This guy is really good at fighting, not only because he has Kung Fu 4, that's going to put his technique pulls at 7, so you got to pull 6 or lower. That's way higher than the guys that we've already looked at. This is going to be one of the best ways to abuse the technique cards. When you need to pull out your heavy hitting fights, you're going to have this guy doing all kinds of kung fu. And when we get to the technique cards and look at them in more detail and look at how the combos work, this guy's going to be even better. The next dude is Natalia. She is a 4 of spades, 2 draw, 1 influence. She's 3 to play with 1 upkeep. She's an abomination. At the start of your upkeep phase, if you have less Ghost Rock in your stash than each other player, you gain the production of the deed at her location this turn, and the other player does not. We've seen a few effects in Doomtown that allow us to steal money, either based on deeds or the production of deeds. There's been a few ways to kind of do this thing, but this is a really interesting new way to do it. You have to have less Ghost Rock than your opponent, and you certainly have some control over that, right? This is going to benefit you spending broke all of the time. Now keep in mind that the gambling phase is before the upkeep phase, so you're going to play lowball before you assess this ability. I don't see that as being a huge limiting factor. Lowball's pretty easy to control with the way that you build your deck, and I think that if you already have a pretty strong draw structure and you're going to be losing lowball reasonably frequently, this might be a way to offset that, since you're probably going to be able to be more poor than your opponent. So I think this gal has some pretty good playability. The next dude that we have is Chen. She's a 4 of spades. She's 1 stud, 2 influence, 4 to play with 2 upkeep. She's Kung Fu 3. Shootout boot. All dudes in your posses become studs and get +1 influence. Here's another pretty heavy hitting Kung Fu dude. Again, you're going to be able to pull 6 or lower to make your technique pulls with her. And at 4 cost, you're going to get that extra influence over Way Foo, who is potentially competing for this same starting dude slot. But you're also going to get this pretty sweet shootout boot ability. Now, the idea of all of your dudes turning into stud kind of appeals to me. You're going to get to draw a lot of cards up front. You're going to be able to name the guy with the biggest bullet as your shooter, and then you're going to get 1 extra stud bullet for all the rest of your dudes. That's probably not going to result in a huge increase in the number of cards you're drawing, but it is going to give you them all up front as stud cards rather than having to discard and get them back as draw cards. This +1 influence seems a little more limited to me. It's only going to last until the end of the shootout, so you're going to potentially have to have something that interacts with influence during a shootout for this to really matter. So I don't know, I think all around this is a pretty good dude. Going to probably be worth it in your starting posse. You could potentially use Benjamin to reduce her initial upkeep cost to none. I think all around this is a potential starter for the Kung Fu strategy in this Bandits deck. And I think it's just a generally pretty good dude that's probably also going to be worth including in your deck if you don't start her. The next dude is Shanks. He's a 5 of spades. He's 1 draw, 1 influence, 4 to play with no upkeep. He's an abomination, Kung Fu 1. While Shanks is unbooted at a location you control, other players cannot choose or affect your other dudes at this location with abilities if they could legally choose to affect Shanks instead. This is sort of like ticks for the Bandits, except instead of affecting action cards, it's going to affect abilities, which remember abilities are like bold text with a colon. So, like noon boot, whatever. So this is going to help against Leon, against Wendy, against Judge Harry Somerset. It's going to help against quite a few powerful cards that already see quite a bit of play. It's also worth pointing out that the outfit power interacts pretty well with this guy. You're going to be able to either move him around or coordinate somebody with him so that he can protect them. This guy's definitely a contender for a starting dude, And even if you don't start him, he seems like a reasonable inclusion. He's got a pretty high value natively, so his Kung Fu 1 is going to allow him to make quite a few pulls still. You're going to be looking at 5 or less. Seems pretty easy to do. I like this guy. I think he's going to be good enough. The next dude that we have is Hyrum Capatch. He is 6 of spades, 1 draw, 1 influence, 3 to play with no upkeep. Each of your other dudes at this and adjacent locations has +1 influence during the upkeep phase. This is kind of a weird and narrow use influence bonus, and the only thing I'm really seeing that you can do with this is control deeds that you wouldn't be able to control otherwise during the upkeep phase. This could potentially deny your opponent some income, or could allow you to reclaim your own deed and then get some income. This is, as with most adjacent-oriented abilities, going to be way stronger if you're in the town square. If this guy's in the town square, you've got a huge buffet of deeds where all of your dudes are going to get that extra influence only during the upkeep phase. That seems reasonably decent to me, and the fact that this guy is cheap, he's worth an influence, he's still got a bullet, and he has no upkeep, means that he might make it into some starting posses. I don't know, this guy's okay. I'm not wildly excited about this guy, but I do think this ability could have some use in the right situations, and he's got pretty good stats overall. He's got a decent value, he's cheap, and he's still worth an influence. The next dude is Chuijang. He's a 7 of spades, 1 draw, 1 influence, 4 to play, no upkeep. He has Kung Fu 1. While he's in a shootout at a location you control, each of your other dudes in the posse has +1 bullets and +1 value. Man, here is another potential Kung Fu starting dude. 7 value with Kung Fu 1. That's going to mean that you can pull 7 or lower. That's barely a restriction, I would say. And no upkeep, still worth an influence. And then he has this trait that is reasonably good as well. I definitely think this is a considerable starting dude. I'm not sure how much you're going to want to play this in your deck with the 7 value. Pulling that could be really a liability if you're playing a lot of other Kung Fu stuff. Now this +1 bullets, +1 value, obviously bullets are good. They are somewhat limited if you're talking about like a large posse, because you're not going to get extra bullets really if you have a large posse. It's just going to be like the shooter gives you 1 more card and then everybody else's bullets is lost. The value I could see mattering a lot more, because you're going to have the potential to make Kung Fu pulls easier. You're going to be more resilient against value-oriented effects. Both of those things seem pretty good. You do have to control the location, though. That's going to mean that it's going to be better probably for defense rather than offense, unless you're looking to have kind of a big fight at your opponent's deed, and they're not willing to control that deed. They're not willing to defend it thoroughly. I don't know, this guy seems pretty good. I think that this is definitely a starting dude if you're doing a Kung Fu-oriented thing, just because the low cost, no upkeep, still worth an influence, and he's going to make basically every Kung Fu pull, assuming that you build your deck well. The next dude is Adalita Espinosa. She's an 8 of spades, 2 draw, 3 influence, 4 to play with 2 upkeep. While she's at a deed that you do not own, each of your other dudes has -1 upkeep. This seems to be a theme with the bandits, this reduction of upkeep. We saw this earlier with Benjamin, and this seems reasonably strong. On just face value, these stats are really, really good. 4 to play for 3 influence and 2 draw. Now she has an 8 of spades, so she's going to be competing with lots of other stuff, and she's also going to be kind of a weak pull if you're doing a lot of Kung Fu oriented stuff. Her trait is reasonably strong. I think that this is something that you'd be able to pull off on an occasional basis. This is definitely a decent dude. It's going to be kind of tricky because of the pull value thing I was talking about, but I definitely think this is a consideration just for the huge influence in the bullets with a relevant trait at a very low cost. The next dude is Bai Yang Chen. He's a 9 of spades, 3 stud, no influence, 3 to play with 2 upkeep. Kung Fu 1. While he's at another player's home, your maximum hand size is increased by 2, and he has -1 upkeep. I think this is the highest Kung Fu dude we've seen so far. You're going to be able to pull 9 or lower, that's pretty good. 3 stud as well. Now, obviously the weakness, no influence, and the 2 upkeep, and his trait is only going to work at another player's home, so that seems reasonably difficult to do. I'm really happy with that though. I like this dynamic of having a reason to be at another player's home, other than just like calling out one other dude with some sort of card effects. This is going to be a reason why you'd want to go to another player's home just to get some sort of economic advantage, and that's pretty cool. I could definitely see it being hard for them to cause some kind of shootout, especially if you have lots of Kung Fu stuff ready to go. And I think this guy's going to make more sense when we look at the Kung Fu techniques and understand kind of how the comboing and the whole thing works. The last bandit dude that we have is Chi Chau. He is a king of spades, 3 stud, 3 influence, 9 to play with 2 upkeep. If your outfit is bandits, his cost is reduced by 1 for each deed you control. Then he has noon/shootout repeat. Boot a deed you control to unboot a dude at that deed or adjacent to it. Holy cow, this guy is really, really strong. I would say this is probably one of the best expensive high-end dudes in the game. Not only does he have a really high value, he's got really good stats in terms of influence and bullets, but he also has this really, really good ability. I'm seeing this mainly as being strong against things like Paralysis Mark. Not only is he himself going to be strong with his really high value, but he's also going to be able to just unboot dudes, especially in the town square, by just booting a deed. And a lot of times we have deeds where we're not really going to boot that deed, it has some power that we don't need, or we can just choose to forego whatever power it has in order to be able to unboot a dude. This seems really strong to me, basically turns a lot of your deeds into the pharmacy. Now this guy is also cheaper for each deed you have, so this definitely seems to fit into kind of a landslide sort of style within the bandits, something where you're playing a lot of deeds down. And I think virtually every deck is going to have like 2 or 3 deeds in play in the sort of game state where you're going to be willing to play this guy. Now that we looked at the dudes, we're going to look at a few of the non-dude cards that are pretty clearly intended to work with the bandits. And the first one that we're going to look at is a new goods card called Nunchucks. It's a 3 of hearts, it gives +1 bullet, it's 2 to play. It's a weapon and it's melee. You can only attach it to a dude with Kung Fu, and while in a posse this dude has +1 Kung Fu. Then it has React Boot. If this dude is in a posse, after a player pulls, reduce the pull by this dude's Kung Fu rating. Oh man, I really like this goods card. First of all, it's only going to work with Kung Fu, so it's obviously pretty limited to the bandits. But this is going to have some really good effects, both on your side of the table and against your opponents. First of all, you can use this to ensure that you make Kung Fu pulls, right? Since you want to pull low with Kung Fu, you're going to be able to use this to make a pull that you wouldn't make otherwise if you happen to pull a high value on your Kung Fu check. Perhaps more importantly, you can use this against your opponent's pulls. So that's going to matter the most in the context of them casting spells in a combat. A lot of times the Huckster decks are pretty lean on their pull values. Like they make them pretty exactly, or they only exceed them by maybe like 1 or 2. So if you have a reasonably high Kung Fu value, like even just 3 or 4, I think there's a pretty good chance that they could pull low enough to fail one of their spell checks. That could be a pretty big deal depending on the spell that they're using. This is really cool. I like this. It's going to be generally pretty decent because of the bullet and the Kung Fu thing, but then it's also going to help with your own pulls, make it a little more permissible to play some high value cards in your deck, and it's going to be able to disrupt one of the strongest decks in the game, which is the 4th ring Huckster-oriented control deck. We're about to look at the techniques, but before we get into them, I need to explain one more aspect of the rules with Kung Fu, which is comboing. Essentially, comboing allows you to play multiple effects in a row without your opponent being able to respond. And you can chain a total number of these techniques together equal to the dude's Kung Fu rating. So if the guy has Kung Fu 2, you'll be able to play the initial technique and potentially combo into 2 additional techniques. Now, the cards that allow for comboing say combo on them and describe the conditions that you have to meet in order for the combo to go off. Now, the big thing here is that you can play these both from your hand, but also from your discard pile. So you're able to pull techniques that have been discarded either from lowball or from you playing them on a previous turn or something. You're going to be able to get those back and chain them into your combo. There is one further restriction. There are 2 different DAOs of techniques, which are like different categories or styles of Kung Fu, and you can only combine the same type together. So you can't kind of cross these 2 techniques. So you're probably going to want to focus on one or the other within your deck. The first one we're looking at does not have one of these DAOs. This is Shifu Speaks. It's an ace of clubs, 0 to play. It's a technique. It has Noon technique. If successful, this dude has +1 influence and +2 Kung Fu while not at home, and you may discard up to 5 cards from the top of your deck. This isn't blowing my mind, but it does fit pretty well into some of the things we're doing with these Kung Fu dudes in the Bandits. First, it's an ace, so it's going to be a good pull on your Kung Fu checks. It's the lowest possible pull. The +1 influence is going to be nice for maybe taking over a deed, surviving that turn, things like that. You're also going to get the +2 Kung Fu, which could potentially be useful if you get into a fight or something like that. Now, the most puzzling part is certainly this discard the 5 cards. The biggest thing I'm seeing with that is that if you mill other techniques, later on if you were to combo, you'd be able to play some of those from your discard pile. It would also maybe let you get through your deck a little bit faster if you're trying to draw some good effect, like if you've already played a lot of your best effects and you want to reshuffle and get those back. This card seems okay. I think there's certainly better techniques, but this one might fit into the right Kung Fu build. It seems pretty easy to use, and is just generally a pretty decent card. The next technique that we have is Drew's Ferocity. This is a 2 of clubs, 0 to play. It's a technique, and this is one of the first that we've seen with the Dao. This is the Dao of Drew Baji. It's shootout Dao technique. If successful, this dude gets +1 bullets, and an opposing dude gets -1 bullets. It combos if this dude has higher bullets than the opposing dude. This seems pretty good all around. You're going to get the bullet thing with both your guy getting bigger, their guy getting smaller. That's going to be useful in basically every shootout. But then you're also going to have this fairly easy to meet combo situation where all you have to do is have higher bullets after you just did a 2-bullet swing. I'm definitely liking this. It's easy to use. The combo's pretty easy to meet. It's at 2 which is probably not going to conflict a whole lot with other things you are going to play. And it's also going to be a low pull for meeting your Kung Fu checks. This seems like a pretty decent technique. The next technique is called Raking Dragons. It is a 3 of clubs, 0 to play. It's a technique, and this one is also Dao of Drew Baji. It's shootout Dao technique. If successful, choose a dude, boot that dude, and give them -2 value. Combo if the affected dude has lower value than this dude. This could potentially matter quite a bit, booting the dude, not only in the combat, shutting down some ability that they might have used that boots them, but also post-combat. If you get out of the combat, their guy's going to be booted for the rest of the turn, that could matter. This combo thing seems reasonably easy to meet. Keep in mind that the Kung Fu rating of your dude is added to his value, so that's going to make it easier for the opponent's dude to have a lower value since your guy's going to get a little extra boost from his Kung Fu. That said, a lot of the Kung Fu dudes don't have particularly high values, so if you're up against a high value dude, I don't know if this -2 is going to get you there. I don't know, this seems reasonably decent. Booting dudes is always good, can be really strong and make the difference in a turn's outcome. It can really change the course of the game being able to boot dudes. And the -2 value could potentially interact well with some other cards. So I don't know, this seems okay. It's not blowing my mind. I think that the last one we looked at was a little stronger, but this certainly could work in the Kung Fu strategy. The next technique we have is called Rabbit's Lunar Leap. It is a 4 of clubs, 0 to play. It's a technique, and this one is Dao of the Jade Rabbit. So this one, remember, cannot be played with the other Dao that we were just looking at. Shootout Dao technique. If successful, move this dude into your posse. You may unboot this dude. Combo if your posse does not have more dudes than the opposing posse. This is certainly a proven effect. Moving your dudes into posses is definitely a good effect. We see lots of that with like Carter's Bounties, the Stake Just Rose, stuff like that. Those effects are really good. And the fact that you also get to unboot the dude is a pretty huge bonus as well, especially if it's a dude with some sort of boot effect, or if the guy was just kind of in a bad position, unbooted, you can bring him in and then after the fight he'll be able to do stuff. Now this combo thing seems a little difficult to meet, but not impossible. All you have to do is tie them in the number of dudes. I can definitely see including this in your Kung Fu deck. It doesn't interact well with the Dao of the Zhu Baji cards, but I think otherwise it's just such a proven and good effect, it's going to be worth including. Next up is Drew's Reward. This is Jack of Clubs, 0 to play. It's a technique and it is Dao of Drew Baji. Shootout Dao technique, boot. If successful, all opposing dudes with value lower than this dude's bullets are sent home booted. This certainly seems powerful. Kicking guys out of a combat, sending them home booted, certainly good. Now, there's a huge limitation. You're going to have lower value on your opponent's dude than your bullets. How high are you realistically going to get your bullets? Like 4, 5? Maybe 6 or 7 in like extreme cases. Now this does have some obvious synergy with the Raking Dragons that we just looked at, which is going to lower the value of a dude in your opponent's posse. Another thing with this is that it's a Jack, so it's going to potentially be a bad pull if you're trying to make Kung Fu tests. Jack is almost certainly going to be too high of a pull, and you could fail on your techniques. For that reason, and the fact that this effect is kind of limited and hard to use, I see this as being the type of card that you would only play maybe 1 or 2 of in your deck. This would be a really great card to grab out of your discard pile off of a combo with another technique. This is a great effect, it's just limited and it's pretty hard to use. I definitely see this being like a 1 or 2 of. That's going to do it for the 108 Righteous Bandits section of this review. I think this faction is very, very different than any of the established factions in the game. I really like that they're trying to pull low. I think pulling low has generally been pretty weak. There's been a few reasons to do that, but not a whole lot. It seems obvious that we're going to get more techniques in the future. I'm not sure that we really have enough of them to like fully flesh out a particular like combo tree sort of thing, but the ones that we have to start out with are really good. I like what's going on with the reduction of upkeep stuff. That seems like a really interesting area of the game that's not explored all that thoroughly, and I'm anxious to see how this faction stacks up against some of the established archetypes. That's it for part 1 of this review. Make sure you tune into part 2. We're going to look at the Eagle Wardens and all of their spirit magic and the interesting things going on over there. If you like the video, make sure you press subscribe and the button that looks like a thumbs up, and I'll see you over in part 2.